Welcome to the deep dive. If you're looking to understand the real foundations of modern Scottish cultural identity, that mix of radical politics, raw urban humor, and rediscovering old songs, you pretty quickly run into this incredible, explosion of energy in the 1950s and 60s, the Scottish folk revival.
Yeah, that term folk revival, it can sound a bit dry, maybe academic,
Yeah.
but in Scotland, it was a practical grassroots thing, a revolution, really, fueled by smoky backrooms and loud, often pretty unruly voices.
Right. So what we're trying to do today is get past that sort of romantic notion. We want to understand the movement as this powerful engine. Culture, class consciousness, real political protest.
Exactly. And we're connecting the dots, aren't we? From those first tiny folk clubs to the big political figures, the amazing songwriters they produced. And centrally, you've got this unmistakable figure, Matt McGinn.
Yeah, McGinn looms large. And the sources we're drawing on, they're really rich, aren't they? Intimate memories, song lyrics, deep biographical stuff. It paints quite a picture.
It really does. And it's crucial, I think, to frame the era itself. The late 50s, early 60s. It was a time of intense change in Scotland. Post-war, industrial shifts, social upheaval.
Right. And into that mix comes traditional Scottish song.
Yeah.
Stuff that had been, either ignored or maybe cleaned up for decades.
Sanitized. And when that tradition met modern political activism, you got this cultural phenomenon. Norman Buchan, who is a key figure we'll talk about, he once said Scotland had perhaps the richest treasury of song in all Europe.
Wow.
And this revival, it finally gave that treasury a modern voice, an unapologetic one.
That sets the stage perfectly. Okay, so let's dive into the architecture of it all, the birth of the clubs. Because this wasn't some top-down thing, was it? Not government-funded or anything?
No, not at all. It was completely patchwork, organic, grew out of individuals with a passion, really. People wanting to preserve the tradition, but also, importantly, evolve it.
So where did it actually start? The very first clubs.
Well, pinpointing the very first can be tricky, debates around that. But the second one, and one that really set a template for the west of Scotland, that was the Rutherglen Academy Ballads Club. Started in 1957.
Okay, 57. And that was Norman Buchan again.
That's right. He was a teacher there at the time. And Rutherglen was foundational, like you say, for a couple of reasons. First, it showed you could get young people fired up about this stuff.
Right. Teenagers?
Yeah, a whole generation of singers, people like Gordiana McCulloch and Nielsen. They came through because of charismatic teachers like Buchan. They went on to have proper careers in folk music.
So it wasn't just about singing old songs. It was about fostering talent.
Absolutely. It set the mold, intellectually and practically. After Rutherglen, the third club popped up, the Edinburgh University Folk Society.
Edinburgh. We'll get to the differences there later, I expect.
We will. But the fourth one, and this is maybe the most influential in terms of a sustainable independent model, was the Glasgow Folk Club, formed in 1959, proposed again by Norman and Janie Buchan.
And I read their start was, almost comical.
Yeah.
Really shaky.
Oh, completely tenuous. The sources say, after the initial buzz, the organizing committee just sort of melted away down to just two people, Drew Moyes and the person actually writing the memory down.
So it nearly died before it even began.
Pretty much, but they stuck with it. And that persistence was key. The Glasgow Folk Club became the first weekly, self-funding folk club in Scotland. That's huge.
Self-funding. So they figured out how to make it work financially week after week without needing university backing or grants.
Exactly. They basically pioneered the model for how a folk club could be a viable, ongoing thing, a regular entertainment option.
And the venues themselves, they weren't exactly concert halls, were they? The early Glasgow one was in the Trongate.
Yeah, a big lunchtime eatery. And the sources give this brilliant picture of the early reality, the sheer grit of it.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine trying to sing these delicate old ballads or maybe lead a big chorus song, and you constantly have to stop mid-verse, mid-note, because the trams outside are rattling past, shaking the whole building.
Oh, wow. You literally couldn't hear the singer over the city noise.
Pretty much. Constant interruptions. It's this perfect image, isn't it? The traditional voice literally battling the noise of the modern industrial city must have been incredibly frustrating.
Utterly defeating, you'd think. But then technology comes to the rescue.
Sort of. After weeks of this, two young guys turn up. They represent that next generation, the modernizers, and they bring in this mysterious setup of microphone wires and boxes.
Amplification.
Basic amplification. Probably pretty crude stuff, but it was enough to conquer the trams.
Right.
And that moment, that simple mic setup, it signals a real shift, doesn't it?
How so?
It's the move from just an informal gathering to an organized performance, something that can actually sustain itself against the background noise, the urban din. It makes the whole thing more viable.
Okay, so now they can actually be heard. What were they singing? That repertoire tells its own story, right? It wasn't just one thing.
Not at all. It was a really conscious blend. And Norman Buchan's selection for his book, 101 Scottish Songs, captures it perfectly. It shows the ambition of the whole project.
So what was in the mix?
Everything, really. You had the really ancient stuff, the heartbreaking traditional ballads like the Dowie Denzo Yarrow,
Right.
centuries old.
Okay, the deep tradition.
But right alongside that, you had new songs. Contemporary national songs addressing modern Scottish life, things like Baron James McFate.
And things like the broadside ditties, those street ballads.
Absolutely vital. That social commentary element. You had gritty songs about transportation, like the Poachers. Real stories about Glasgow folk being sent overseas for minor crimes. A direct link to past social issues that maybe resonated with present ones, too.
So a real range.
A complete treasury, as Buchan saw it. Traditional stories, social comment, political thought, loads of humor body stuff, too, and classic love songs like Will Ye Gang Love. That was the raw material the first wave of folk club singers and audiences were working with.
Which brings us back to Norman Buchan. He seems like the central architect, really. Not just starting clubs, but providing the philosophy, the structure, especially with that songbook.
Yeah, the We Read songbook. He was crucial, operating on all fronts. Teacher, activist, curator. He laid the groundwork with that weekly Bothy Ballads column in the Weekend Scotsman.
We should probably explain Bothy ballads quickly.
Good point. They're basically the work songs of farmhands, the Bothy men. Often funny, satirical, sung by guys living together in basic accommodation, the Bothys in agricultural areas.
So songs about real working life, hardship, camaraderie, humor, not the romantic Heather on the Hills version of Scotland.
Exactly, far removed from that. Buchan compiled these column songs and loads of others into 101 Scottish songs in 1962. And because it was small, pocket size, and had this distinctive red cover,
everyone called it the We Read Songbook.
Instantly. Permanently. It became the absolute handbook for the whole movement. Everyone had one.
But it wasn't just what he collected. It was how he presented it, right? He made a deliberate break from something called kailyardery.
Yes, and kailyard is a key term here. It refers to that overly sentimental, nostalgic, often quite sanitized view of rural Scottish life, usually ignoring the harsher realities, especially of the modern, urban, industrial Scotland where most people actually lived by then.
So Buchan rejected that.
Completely. He wanted a repertoire more suited to the needs of the present time. Songs that spoke to contemporary life, not just some rosy past.
And how did the presentation change to reflect that, the music itself?
This was a really big deal, culturally. He ditched the reliance on pianoed accompaniments,
which were associated with
older styles, often middle-class parlors, highly arranged, sort of proper versions of folk songs from sheet music. Instead, Buchan started putting simple guitar chords above the lyrics.
Guitar chords? That sounds simple now, but was that controversial? Seen as, I don't know, American, not authentically Scottish.
There was always that kind of tension, yeah. Purists existed. But the genius was its pragmatism.
Yeah.
It tapped right into what younger people were listening to. Remember, this is post-skiffle craze Britain.
Oh, right. Lonnie Donegan, acoustic guitars, banjos.
Exactly. Guitar strumming, banjo picking, and American hoedowns, as the source puts it. The kids in his Rutherglen Club loved traditional Scottish songs, but they were also into this new, accessible, guitar-driven sound.
So putting guitar chords in the book made the songs playable for them.
Precisely. Teenagers could learn them in their bedrooms. You didn't need formal piano lessons or the ability to read complex arrangements. It connected the deep tradition to the contemporary sound of youth culture. A brilliant move.
It really is modernization in action.
Yeah.
Taking the old words, the core stories, and giving them a sound that resonated with the new urban working class. And that energy, it must have spread beyond just Rutherglen.
Oh, it did, quickly. Through public performances, concerts the Buchans organized, and these popular ballads and blues nights, they happened at the Iona Communities Place down on the Broomielaw, Clydeside.
So dedicated spaces for this music were popping up.
Yeah, crucial nodes, spreading the vibe, creating platforms for new singers. And alongside the formal clubs, you had these really important social hubs, like the Blythemans House on Balgray Hill.
Right, the seal is there.
These were massive gatherings, music, dancing, the whole traditional social event. They'd been running since the mid-50s, even before the clubs really took off. And they were genuine incubators.
Producing big names.
Major figures came through there, according to Jimmy McGregor. Matt McGinn himself, Archie Fisher, Robin Hall. It gave loads of people a lifelong interest in their own traditions. These informal settings were just as important as the clubs.
And then there's the legendary Broomhill Bums. That name alone tells you something.
Doesn't it just sounds like trouble? They were described as a ramshackle assembly, but they were the creative, sometimes maybe chaotic heart of the Glasgow Club.
And their base was a party.
Essentially, yes. An ongoing 19-month-long party at Hamish Imlach's house in Broomhill.
19 months. That's not a party. That's a residency.
It was practically a folk commune. But that intense shared living space meant people like Imlach, Josh and Sheila McRae, Jim McLean, Archie and Ray Fisher, Jackie O'Connor. They were constantly sharing songs, trying out new stuff, working up the political numbers and the big chorus songs that became the club's signature. The social scene directly fed the artistic output.
But amidst all that, well, chaos, maybe.
Yeah.
The move towards paying performers started early, too. You mentioned the Glasgow Club paying Jimmy McBeath.
Yes, paying their first official guest. Jimmy McBeath, a great traditional singer, they paid him £8.
Which doesn't sound like much now, but...
Back then, it was significant. The source emphasizes it was more than he'd ever before got from singing. It was a statement. It showed that this music, these traditional performers, had actual monetary value. Singing wasn't just a hobby or something you did for a pint anymore.
It opened the door to professionalism.
Exactly. Singers who used to just pass a hat around suddenly saw a path maybe to making a living from it.
Okay, this feels like a natural point to shift focus squarely onto the politics. Because the Glasgow scene, especially, fueled by these characters, it was overtly political, right from the start of the 60s, wasn't it?
Absolutely central. And the big initial trigger was the anti-Polaris movement, the protests against American nuclear submarines being based at the Holy Loch.
Right, and song became a weapon.
A direct vehicle for activism, yeah. The confidence to write and perform political songs really blossomed around this issue.
And the key figures weren't just singers, they were songwriters, crafting this stuff.
Definitely. The collective, if you like, was led by Josh McRae and the incredibly prolific Morris Blythman. Blythman used this brilliant pseudonym, Thurso Berwick.
Thurso Berwick, fantastic. And they wrote for the protesters.
Yeah, specifically for the protesters who became known as the Glasgow Eskimos. They churned out these irreverent satirical biddies.
Glasgow Eskimos. Where did that name come from? Was it about the weather?
Partly, probably. You know, protesting on the banks of a Scottish loch year-round isn't exactly tropical. But it was also deliberately absurd, self-deprecating. It fit the satirical style of the protest. They were fighting something deadly, serious nuclear war with humor and often quite rude songs.
And that style worked. People responded to it.
Massively. Ronnie Clark's quote in the sources nails it. Holy Loch songs and Republican songs, too, were incredibly popular. People were always very happy to join in and raise their voices to make a noise.
So these weren't songs for quiet listening. They were for participation, for shouting on marches.
Exactly. Made for the street, for rallies, for pubs packed shoulder to shoulder. They had to be catchy, instantly accessible. It was about creating a popular culture of dissent, not writing intellectual essays set to music for an elite few. It had to activate people.
Okay, so Glasgow. Political, working class, maybe a bit chaotic, but incredibly energetic. What about Edinburgh? How did the scene develop differently there?
Well, the Edinburgh University Folk Society kicked off in '58, so they were early too. But Edinburgh generally had maybe a slightly more intellectual feel, partly because you had major figures like Hamish Henderson, the great folklorist and poet, based there.
And on the performance side, Delena McLennan was key.
Hugely influential, powerful Gaelic folk singer. She eventually became president of the University Club, and her beginnings really show that grassroots spirit again. She started singing in the Waverley Bar back in 1959.
In a pub. Was that even legal then?
Strictly speaking, probably not. Music in pubs was heavily restricted, often just not allowed officially. So her just doing it and being successful was a real act of claiming cultural space.
Pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely. It showed pubs could become folk venues, and her influence spread. She actually gave the Corries, who became huge internationally, their first proper gig at the Waverley, showed them the ropes of performing live.
So Edinburgh was maybe a bit more structured early on, introducing professional elements?
It seems so. While Glasgow was fizzing with politics, Edinburgh had people like Abby Sale, an American influence, who helped introduce the idea of paying guest performers properly, establishing standards.
And the types of performers reflected that difference, too.
To an extent. Edinburgh was fertile ground for amazing traditional singers like Delena and the wonderful Jean Redpath. but it also nurtured incredible songwriters who pushed the boundaries acoustically, like Bert Jansch and, a bit later, Dick Gone. Maybe more complex, intricate stuff alongside the tradition.
Okay, so Glasgow and Edinburgh had their distinct flavors, but then you go northeast to Aberdeenshire, and the sources say it wasn't really a revival there at all. What's that about?
Yeah, this is a really important distinction. The sources argue that in Aberdeen, the tradition was already one of continuing life and vitality. It hadn't died out and didn't need reviving in the same way. Well, it's farming and fishing country, right? So the Bothy ballads we mentioned, they were still part of the fabric of life, sung regularly, featured on local TV shows like Bothy Nicks. They weren't historical artifacts being dusted off, they were living songs.
Integrated into daily life, not something discovered by city intellectuals.
Precisely. And crucially, the traveling community, the Stewarts of Fetter-Angus, for example, including incredible singers like Lucy Stewart and her niece Elizabeth Thury, they were often more accepted, more integrated into the community there, and they were the carriers of that really deep, ancient ballad tradition.
So it sounds richer, maybe more constantly evolving.
That's the argument, and it leads to this interesting critique you find in the sources, sometimes aimed at people like you and McCall. The Aberdeen perspective, articulated by Danny Cooper, was that McCall sometimes dealt with what they saw as a dead tradition you can control, something fixed that you could study and package.
Whereas Aberdeen's was
Lave, messy, constantly changing, new verses being added to old songs, woven into the community. Live all the time, as Cooper put it.
But they still formed a folk club in Aberdeen, even with this living tradition all around.
They did. The Aberdeen Folk Club got its start when Arthur Argo and Danny Cooper organized a singing night at a place called P. Peep's Bar. So even with the tradition being alive, the club structure provided a focus, a dedicated venue.
And was it political like Glasgow?
It had support from left-wingers, Communist Party members, so that political thread was there, as it was across the movement. But the initial energy seems more about celebrating that vibrant, ongoing local tradition. The sign outside the bar apparently said, "Come sin or ony why ye like," which kind of sums up that open, pragmatic Aberdeen attitude.
Okay, let's head south again. Fife. Often overshadowed by the big cities, maybe, but the sources say it punched above its weight.
Immensely important, Fife, especially for producing major songwriters who came out of the revival, people like John Watt and Rab Noakes.
And John Watt started the Dunfermline Club.
Yeah, apparently inspired after meeting Delina McLennan and Robin Hall, so you see the connections spreading. He established a strong local base there.
And Rab Noakes is interesting because he shows how people came to the clubs from maybe a more mainstream starting point.
Exactly. He first heard folk music through commercial acts, maybe Robin Hall and Jimmy McGregor on TV, or the White Heather Club, that more polished, perhaps slightly less raw version.
But the clubs offered something deeper.
They offered authenticity, tradition, but crucially, they also became the place where young people like Rab could start writing their own songs. Songs rooted in their own place, their own history. The focus shifts from just performing old stuff to creating new stuff within the tradition.
And Fife really embraced that songwriting aspect.
Massively. You had the Great Fife Roadshow around 1969, 1970. That was basically a touring showcase for new original songs grounded in Fife's own traditions mining industry. It showed songwriting had moved center stage in the revival's purpose.
But with songwriting and performing becoming more central, you get into the tricky area of business, right?
Yeah.
The story about the Geely Peace song is a classic cautionary tale.
Oh, it's perfect. The ultimate folk revival dilemma. Adam McNaughton writes this brilliant, funny song about Glasgow kids getting jam sandwiches lowered down from tenement windows.
A real slice of life.
Totally. He gives permission to Ian Davison's group to record it first. The record's a huge hit, sells loads, especially in places like Castlemilk.
So, success. Royalties rolling in.
Well, that's the rub. They'd naively signed up for a set fee, and we didn't see any of the royalties. It just shows that transition. The music was clearly popular, clearly commercial, but the artists themselves, driven by that initial community spirit, maybe lacked the business savvy. They got caught out as the industry started to build around them, a harsh lesson in publishing deals.
Right. Okay, let's circle back to Glasgow, to maybe the ultimate symbol of that raw urban folk club scene. Ye Olde Scotia Inn, down by Sockwell Street. Late 60s this is.
Yeah, the Scotia became iconic, right next door to the old Scotia Music Hall where Harry Lauder had started, apparently. Once the rules about singing in pubs relaxed a bit, it just became the natural hub, the informal HQ for the later Glasgow scene.
And the description of who is actually in the pub sounds completely wild, the internal geography.
But it's almost unbelievable, isn't it? You've got this long, curved bar, the left half packed with folkies, belting out chorus songs. 100 voice chorus singing, the source says. Loud, passionate, intense.
Okay. And the right half.
Reserved for the local chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club.
Wait, folk singers and Hells Angels sharing the same bar? How on earth did that work?
Apparently it just did. A kind of weird urban coexistence.
Yeah.
The Angels used a separate entrance, had their designated spot, and somehow just tolerated the noise from the folk side.
They just ignored the singing, no crossover.
Seems like it was pretty segregated, acoustically dominated by the singers, but spatially divided. It speaks volumes about Glasgow at the time, maybe. That intense mix of different high-energy subcultures crammed together. And before the Angels even arrived, apparently there was the wee back room.
What was that?
Tiny space, maybe hold 20 people. Early arrivals would cram in there and just start singing together. So the night kicked off with this really intense, close quarters jamming even before the main bar filled up.
That whole environment, loud folkies, Hells Angels, intense jamming, it feels like the perfect chaotic breeding ground for someone like Matt McGinn.
Absolutely. McGinn, born 1928, died 77, is the absolute embodiment of that specific Glasgow energy. Political, working class, fiercely funny. His background just explains so much about why his voice cut through.
And his early life was incredibly tough, wasn't it?
Yeah, born 8th of 9 kids. Grew up in a 2-room flat near the Gallowgate in the Calton area. Deeply working-class Glasgow. Had run-ins with the law as a kid, petty crime. Ended up in St. Mary's approved school.
Which became the setting for his novel.
That's right, Fry the Little Fishes. That experience clearly marked him. He wasn't someone who came to folk music from university studies. He came straight from the heart of industrial Glasgow. Worked heavy jobs, Harland and Wolf Shipyard, a screw factory.
Guest Keen in Nettlefold. And that's where his activism kicked in early.
Immediately. Organized a strike within days of starting at the screw factory, became shop steward for 4 years. He learned politics on the factory floor, but he was also fiercely intelligent, self-educated.
And that led to the big opportunity.
The trade union scholarship to Ruskin College, Oxford, studied economics, political science, then trained as a teacher up in Huddersfield. A remarkable journey out of the Gallowgate.
And his identity was forged by all of this.
Completely. Willie Maley called him a campaigning cultural figure. He blended socialism, trade unionism, political protest, but always with that earthy humor and a terrific line in Glasgow patter.
Politically complex, too. Joined the Communist Party, left, rejoined. Became an atheist young.
Yeah, not easily pigeonholed, but his absolute bedrock was commitment to the working class and speaking truth to power, often with a punchline.
And that combination, the authenticity, the politics, the humor, that's what made his songwriting so potent. How did he actually get into the folk scene from teaching?
Almost by chance, it seems. While he was training in Huddersfield, nowhere near the Scottish folk hubs yet, he entered a local newspaper competition.
And won?
Yep. With the Foreman O'Rourke, the song about the factory worker getting his own back by flushing the boss down the loo.
Classic McGinn. Takes that power dynamic in the workplace, turns it into this hilariously visceral image.
It's pure McGinn aesthetic right from the start. Direct, funny, anti-authoritarian, and he was incredibly prolific. The sources say he could sometimes write 6 songs in a day.
6 songs? How was that even possible?
Hamish Imlach had a theory. He thought McGinn sometimes lost interest quickly, jumping to the next idea instead of, as he put it, polishing a brilliant idea. But Imlach also admitted that speed was his genius. He caught the moment, the feeling, instantly.
And he didn't write them down?
Apparently not. Purely oral. He'd just remember them, sing them line by line until they were fixed in his head. An incredible memory.
Okay, now for this moment, that just seems astonishing. The Carnegie Hall gig. How does this working class guy from Glasgow, relatively new on the scene, end up headlining in New York on the same bill as Bob Dylan?
It shows the clout the British and particularly the Scottish folk scene had internationally in the early 60s. The key was Pete Seeger, the great American folk activist and musician. He met McGinn in 1961.
And Seeger was impressed.
Instantly captivated by the voice, the raw energy, the politics, the humor. Seeger got it immediately.
And invited him to Carnegie Hall.
As a headliner, yes. And here's the killer detail from the sources, the context for that 1961 concert. McGinn reported his fee was $200.
Okay. Dylan.
Bob Dylan, further down the same bill, got $60.
$60.
Yeah.
Compared to McGinn's $200.
Yeah. Dylan was described as a polite and rather nervous young singer-songwriter back then. Apparently, Dylan even sought McGinn out for advice about touring the UK.
That completely flips the usual narrative, doesn't it? In that specific moment, McGinn, representing that powerful, funny, political Glasgow working-class voice, was seen as the bigger draw, the more established act than the guy who would become, well, Dylan.
It's incredible context. McGinn himself joked about it later. I started at the top. From then on, it had to be down all the way. But even if that was the absolute peak internationally, he stayed right at the top of the UK folk scene throughout the 60s.
And his performance style was inseparable from the songs. That voice untutored, gravelly, and that word gallus.
Callous. It's such a Glasgow word. It means bold, cheeky, swaggering, maybe a bit defiant, a bit dangerous, especially in that working class way. McGinn had it in bucket loads.
His songs weren't sentimental then?
Not at all. Vibrant portrayals of working class life, scabrous reflections on social issues, sharp, witty, sometimes angry.
And he was a master of parody, using traditional tunes for modern political points.
Absolutely, like Manura Manya takes an old comic Irish tune, The Kerry Recruit, and turns it into this hilarious story about a Glasgow guy who collects horse dung for a living.
Okay, sounds funny, but where's the politics?
The punchline is he loses his job because of mechanical power, the arrival of cars, basically. So it's funny, yeah, but it's also a sharp comment on technological change, putting working folk out of a job. Seeger loved that one, made it famous in the States.
But he wasn't just taking shots at the bosses, was he? He could be critical of his own side, too.
That's crucial, a sign of real depth. His song 3 Nights and a Sunday Double Time. It's scathing about workers who only look out for themselves, ignoring solidarity, that whole attitude of, "Day how we jack, I'm all right." He saw the divisions within the working class and called them out.
So humor, politics, self-critique, but also real pathos, like the song about Benny Lynch.
Yeah, the Benny Lynch elegy is heartbreaking. Lynch was this huge working class hero, boxer from the Gorbals, won a world title, an incredible achievement, but then he battled alcoholism, died tragically young, only 33 from malnutrition.
And McGinn captured that whole arc.
He captured the pride, the glory, and then the terrible fall. It shows McGinn's deep empathy for the struggles, the casualties of that life. It wasn't all jokes and politics. There was profound sadness there, too.
And being that outspoken, that political, it carried risks, didn't it? Even if you weren't, say, a card-carrying party member.
Oh, the blacklisting was definitely real. Hamish Imlach tells a story about being blacklisted by something called the Economic League as late as 1989.
1989? What for?
Just for being seen as a communist sympathizer, basically, even though he swore he'd never actually been a member. This group kept files on people, and being on their list could seriously damage your chances of getting work.
So, real consequences.
Right.
Yet, Imlach's story also shows things could be fluid back in the 60s.
It's funny, yeah. He recalled singing for the young communists one night and then going off to sing for the young conservatives the same night.
Seriously?
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Sometimes the music, the fun, the shared culture of the clubs, maybe it could temporarily bridge those political divides.
But McGinn really did blaze that trail towards making a living out of it, being political and professional.
He was arguably the first major political songmaker from the revival who really became a full-time professional performer, proved you could do it.
And he mentored younger talent coming through.
Definitely. The sources mention a very young Billy Connolly playing in his backing band for a while, along with guitarist Tam Harvey. The clubs and the professionals like McGinn were the training ground.
And what a training ground. The list of people who emerged is incredible. John Martin, Barbara Dixon,
Bert Jansch, Dick Gaughan, the McKelmans, major names in Scottish music and beyond. That folk club infrastructure, rough as it sometimes was, it really nurtured world-class talent.
And as the scene grew, that infrastructure got a bit more formalized, like the Glasgow Folk Centre.
Yeah, Drew Moyes, who'd been there right at the start of the Glasgow Club, he eventually moved it into its own dedicated building, the Glasgow Folk Centre on Montrose Street. That was a big step. Centralization, organization.
Running multiple nights, lessons.
Yeah, guest performers every week, instrument lessons during the day, really trying to build a proper base.
And print media played a role in holding it all together, too. The magazine chapbook.
Hugely important. Created by Arthur Argo up in Aberdeen, ran from 64 to 68. It was basically the guidebook and diary of the Scottish folk revival, the paper of record for the movement.
What kind of stuff was in it?
Everything. New songs being written, news from the clubs all over Scotland, reviews, longer articles debating issues. It kept that political edge sharp, too.
Showing that new songs were still tackling current events.
Absolutely. It published prize-winning songs from an Aberdeen competition about the war titles, like Dunkirk, as Scott remembers, and Sing a Song of Buttercups. Later on, you find songs attacking Charles de Gaulle, songs about the hardships building the hydro dams, powerful responses to the Aberfan disaster in Wales. Chapbooks showed folk music as the living conscience of the times.
But like all golden eras, it couldn't last forever at that intensity. The sources suggest chapbook folding in '68 kind of marked a turning point, a waning of that initial energy.
It seems to coincide, yeah. That early, spontaneous, maybe slightly chaotic community energy was starting to shift. Commercialism was getting a stronger hold.
And the relationship between the audience and performer changed.
That's what the sources suggest. That distance grew. It became less about everyone crammed in, singing together, participating actively, and more like a standard gig, audience consuming, performer performing. That original Trongate buzz was fading.
But before it faded completely, McGinn really cemented his place in popular culture, didn't he? Not just with politics, but with that sheer, often pretty rude humor. Like his version of the Dogs Party.
Oh, the Dogs Meeting? Yeah, it's a perfect example. He takes this really quite crude, popular, probably playground-level song.
About getting mixed up during a fire.
Exactly. And sets it to the tune of a well-known hymn, The Church's One Foundation. It's hilarious, irreverent, and it became a standard in the folk clubs.
Yeah.
It just shows how the revival embraced all sorts of material, the ancient ballads, the political protests, and the really earthy common touch humor. It wasn't precious about it.
But despite that popularity, that connection with ordinary folk, McGinn's own later years were really difficult.
Tragically so, yes. After that initial international fame, the Carnegie Hall peak, he did struggle, financially, personally. The sources mention him living in distressed circumstances in a basement flat towards the end. It's incredibly sad. The man who articulated the working class experience so brilliantly ended up sharing his hardships so acutely himself.
And his death was so sudden, so shocking.
Just awful. January 1977, only 48 years old. Died in a fire at home, apparently after falling asleep with a lit cigarette. Such a waste of that incredible energy and talent.
But the affection for him, the legacy, it's clearly endured.
Oh, absolutely. There's a statue of him in the People's Palace Museum in Glasgow Green, a plaque in his home area of Colton. And tribute concerts were still happening decades after his death. People haven't forgotten him. He remains this really potent symbol of authentic Glasgow culture.
So when we look back at this whole period, this deep dive,
Yeah.
it really wasn't just about dusting off old songs, was it? It was this active forging of a new kind of Scottish identity, using protest, using humor.
Yeah, and the sources kind of end on this poignant note, suggesting that Matt McGinn's Scotland is gone, meaning that specific, vibrant, urban, working-class culture, rooted in heavy industry, strong unions, that shared experience, it's changed so much.
But the revival itself was that bridge, connecting the past, the ballads, the language, with the immediate present of socialism, trade unionism.
Exactly. It created this living link, and it was defined by a culture that kicked against deference, that wasn't afraid to be loud, funny, and angry about injustice.
A culture embodied by McGinn, defiant, funny, sharp. Hamish Henderson had a great insight into McGinn's own internal world, didn't he?
He did. Henderson saw McGinn's transcendent talents, that incredible ability, but he also saw underneath the gallus exterior a deep fund of melancholy.
Melancholy, why?
Henderson thought it came from McGinn throwing himself so completely into the struggle for humanity, for a better world, while knowing deep down that the fight is endless, that it would continue long after him. It connects his personal story back to that huge political and human struggle he represented.
Which really leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty challenging thought, doesn't it? The revival produced these figures who gave voice to the unheard, who created popular culture that wasn't just, as the source says, the trite, the banal, and the commercial.
So the question becomes, who's doing that now? Who has that same mix? The humor, the politics, the connection to history, the voice for those not usually heard. Where are today's cultural troubadours, the agitators? Knowing about the specific, intense moment in Scottish history kind of puts the onus on us, on you, to look for and support those voices now, to make sure that critical, defiant, popular voice doesn't get drowned out.
A powerful challenge. We'll leave you with Matt McGinn's own words from his song Depth of My Ego. A reminder, perhaps, of the artist's inner resilience, even in the face of struggle. I still hold the key to the place where I am free, a place that only I control.